The Cathar Empire dominated the galaxy with methodical precision. Their vast military fleets enforced rigid hierarchy across countless star systems, operating on cold logic and ruthless efficiency. To them, war was a mathematical equation, each decision calculated for maximum strategic advantage with minimal resource expenditure. The ongoing conflict with the Terran Alliance was merely another problem to be solved. Humans were technologically inferior, physically weaker, yet frustratingly persistent in ways the Cathar could not comprehend. Commander Kalen stood on the command deck of his battlecruiser, the relentless judgment, watching tactical displays with narrowed eyes. The distant engagement had gone precisely as projected. The human medical transport had been disabled with surgical precision, its engines and communication systems rendered inoperable without destroying the vessel itself. Intelligence had flagged this particular ship as potentially carrying valuable medical technology that might be adapted for Cathar use. Status report, Kalen demanded, his tall, angular frame perfectly still as he awaited information. Target vessel immobilized, Commander. Life support systems still functional but failing. Detecting minimal life signs. Most crew appear to have evacuated via escape pods before a final approach. Scans indicate one remaining life form in the medical bay, reported his tactical officer. Kalen nodded curtly. Prepare a boarding team. I will lead the inspection personally. This vessel may contain information of value to the Empire. The boarding was executed with typical Cathar efficiency. Kalen led his squad through the disabled ship's corridors, past sparking panels and emergency lighting. The air carried an acrid smell of burned circuitry and something else, antiseptic cleaners and biological material. Human medical facilities always had that distinctive scent that the Cathar found vaguely unsettling. They reached the medical bay, its doors partially sealed by emergency protocols. With a gesture from Kalen, his engineers bypassed the security and the doors slid open with a reluctant hiss. Inside, a solitary human female worked feverishly over a patient on an operating table. She didn't even look up as the Cathar soldiers entered, their weapons raised. Instead, she continued administering some sort of treatment to the critically injured human before her. Step away from the patient, Kalen ordered in flawless Terran standard. You are now property of the Cathar Empire. Only then did she glance up, her eyes narrowing as she took in the armed soldiers. I'm rather busy saving a life. Either shoot me or wait until I'm finished. The audacity of the response momentarily stunned Kalen. Humans typically reacted with fear when confronted by Cathar boarding parties. This one displayed neither fear nor submission, only irritation at the interruption. Your patient appears beyond recovery, Kalen observed clinically, noting the critical readings on the medical monitors. Your efforts are inefficient. Inefficient. The woman finally turned to face him fully, her blood-stained hands held away from her body. This inefficiency is what we call compassion. Lieutenant Chun has a 5% chance of survival, which means there's still hope. In my profession, we don't abandon someone just because they're statistically unlikely to survive. Kalen was about to respond when one of his soldiers suddenly staggered, clutching at his breathing apparatus. Then another. Something was affecting his team. The human doctor noticed immediately. Your soldiers are reacting to Xenivarian fungal spores. The patient was exposed during the last planet-side mission, and the spores become airborne during treatment. She gestured to a containment field that had been damaged in the attack. They're harmless to humans, but toxic to your species' respiratory system. Kalen's hand moved to his own breathing filter, but the woman shook her head. Your commander-grade filter will protect you, but your soldiers' standard filters won't handle it. I can synthesize a neutralizing agent, but you'll need to let me work. Kalen hesitated only briefly before making a decision. Proceed. With remarkable speed, the human doctor moved to a partially damaged dispensary, combining several compounds with practiced efficiency before loading them into an aerosol device. She released the compound into the air, and within moments, his affected soldiers began to recover. That should neutralize the immediate threat, she said, turning back to her patient, who had flatlined during the interruption. She sighed deeply, closing the unseeing eyes with a gentle motion of her fingers. Too late for Lieutenant Ramirez, though. Your name? Kalen demanded, reassessing the potential value of this human. Dr. Eris Thorne, Chief Medical Officer of the UTS Mercy. She straightened, squaring her shoulders. And I'm not. Property. I'm a prisoner of war, entitled to certain protections under the Galactic Conventions. The Cthar Empire recognizes no such conventions, Dr. Thorne. However, your medical knowledge appears potentially useful. Kalen tapped his communicator. Secure the medical databases from this vessel and prepare accommodation for one high-value biological asset. Dr. Thorne raised an eyebrow. You mean a cell? As you wish to term it, Kalen replied indifferently. Your survival depends entirely on your usefulness to the Empire. And yet, she said with unexpected calm as she was restrained by the soldiers, you needed my help within 30 seconds of meeting me. I suspect I'll be quite useful indeed. Kalen felt an unfamiliar sensation, a twinge of uncertainty. This human was different from others he had encountered. Most interesting, the Cthar Research Facility on Meridian 9 was a marvel of efficiency, stark, gleaming architecture housing the Empire's cutting-edge biological research within a high-security military installation. Kalen had arranged for Dr. Thorne to be quartered in a modified laboratory adjacent to the lowest-tier medical ward, where she could be kept under constant surveillance while her skills were assessed. 3 standard weeks had passed since her capture, and the reports crossing Kalen's desk were perplexing. He decided a personal inspection was warranted. He found Thorne attending to a line of injured Cthar workers, mostly maintenance technicians and low-caste laborers who had been injured in a minor industrial accident. What caught his attention was the methodical care she gave each patient, regardless of their obvious status within Cthar hierarchy. You are expending the same effort on a simple maintenance drone as you would on a skilled technician, Kalen observed as he approached. This is inefficient resource allocation. Thorne didn't look up from the burn she was treating on a worker's arm. In human medicine, we don't rank patients by their societal value. We treat based on medical need. This contradicts the Empire's triage protocols, said Senior Medical Officer Verix, who had been assigned to oversee the human. Critical resources should be directed to those of higher operational value. And how's that working for you? Thorne applied a regenerative compound to the burn. Because based on your medical logs, your mortality rates are significantly higher than they should be for a civilization with your technology level. Verix bristled visibly. Our protocols are mathematically optimized. Your protocols, Thorne interrupted, waste lives unnecessarily. You let minor injuries become critical because you delay treatment for lower-ranked individuals. Then you expend vastly more resources trying to save them when simple preventative care would have been more efficient. Kalen found himself intrigued by her argument. You claim your methods are more efficient despite appearing to waste resources on low-value assets. Thorne finally looked up, her eyes sharp. First, they're not assets, they're people. Second, yes, I've compiled the data. She gestured to a nearby terminal where she had apparently been granted limited access. In just these 3 weeks, my treatment methods have reduced recovery time by an average of 42% and decreased resource consumption by 27% compared to your standard protocols. Kalen examined the data himself, finding her analysis surprisingly thorough for someone with limited access to Cthar systems. The numbers supported her claim. Your technique appears effective, he acknowledged, but it contradicts our fundamental principles of hierarchical value. Maybe those principles need re-examination, Thorne suggested boldly. Medical outcomes don't care about your hierarchy. An alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility, cutting their conversation short. Emergency protocols activated as red warning lights flashed overhead. Containment breach in Laboratory 7, announced the automated system. Biohazard alert. All personnel implement Containment Protocol Sigma 9. Verix's expression shifted to one of genuine concern, a rarity for Cthar. Laboratory 7 contains experimental bioweapons research. if there's been a containment failure. They rushed to the emergency response center, where Cathar medical teams were already mobilizing. Kalen quickly assessed the situation from the command displays. An experimental pathogen had been accidentally released when a pressure seal failed. Several high-ranking scientists were trapped inside the contaminated area, along with dozens of research assistants and laboratory workers. Implement standard isolation procedures, ordered the head researcher, an elderly Cathar named Savak. Priority extraction for senior research staff only. Thorne, who had followed them into the command center, spoke up immediately. That's the wrong approach. The pathogen is spreading through the ventilation system. If you open those doors for a selective evacuation, you'll expose the entire facility. This human has no authority here, Suvak snapped. But she has expertise, Kalen interjected, surprising himself. Dr. Thorne, what do you suggest? Without hesitation, Thorne moved to the facility schematics. Remote seal all ventilation systems. Then we need to neutralize the pathogen before it spreads further. From these readings, it appears to be protein-based. We can denature it with a targeted electromagnetic pulse combined with a specific chemical agent. Such a pulse would destroy sensitive equipment, protested Suvak. And your selective evacuation will destroy lives, Thorne countered, including those of your precious senior researchers, who will be infected before they can clear decontamination. As they argued, the first casualties began to appear on the monitors. Cathar researchers collapsing as the pathogen took effect. Implement Dr. Thorne's strategy, Kalen ordered decisively. Now, the next hours were chaos as Thorne directed a hastily assembled team to modify the facility's security systems to deliver the electromagnetic pulse she needed. Working with Cathar technicians who were initially resistant but quickly recognized her expertise, she created a makeshift delivery system for the neutralizing agent. When the crisis was finally contained, the results were unambiguous. The pathogen had been neutralized with minimal spread. Casualties were far below projected numbers for such an incident. And most significantly, the survival rate was consistent across hierarchical levels. Thorne had insisted on treating all exposed personnel based on medical need rather than rank. In the aftermath, Kalen found Thorne exhausted, but still working, attending to a junior research assistant whose exposure had been particularly severe. Your intervention saved this facility, he acknowledged, and many lives, including many your protocols would have sacrificed, she said quietly, adjusting an intravenous medication. That's the difference in our approaches, Commander. You classify lives as expendable. I don't. Yet in war, some losses are inevitable, Kalen countered. Inevitable doesn't mean acceptable. She finally stood, fatigue evident in her posture. And it certainly doesn't mean we shouldn't try to save everyone we can. Kalen studied her carefully. Your methods produce results, but they also undermine the fundamental structure of our society. The Cathar Empire functions on clear hierarchies of value. And that's precisely why you're losing this war, Thorne said bluntly. You waste potential. Every one of these low-value assets you so casually discard could contribute something meaningful if you actually invested in them. As Kalen left the medical ward, he found himself troubled by a realization. Dr. Thorne wasn't just treating bodies. She was introducing dangerous ideas. Ideas that challenged the very foundation of Cathar civilization. Yet her results were undeniable. For the first time in his career, Kalen found himself questioning whether efficiency and hierarchy were truly the same thing. The front lines of the Cathar-Terran conflict were brutal. A contested planet in the Rigel sector where massive ground forces clashed over strategic mineral deposits. When Dr. Thorne was transferred to the forward medical installation, it was out of desperate necessity. Casualty rates had reached unsustainable levels, and conventional Cathar medical protocols were failing to maintain adequate troop numbers. Kalen had been ordered to accompany her, officially to ensure she didn't escape or sabotage the war effort. Unofficially, High Command was intrigued by the reports of her unorthodox but effective methods. Her first action upon arrival at the Battlefield Medical Center had nearly caused a riot among the Cathar medical staff. This triage system is completely backward, she announced after reviewing the protocols. You're treating minor injuries on officers while grunts with critical wounds die waiting. The senior field medic, a battle-hardened Kthar named Trax, bristled visibly. We follow established protocol. Command staff receive priority treatment. Well, your established protocol is why you're losing soldiers faster than you can replace them. Thorne moved to a central display terminal and pulled up the casualty statistics. Look at these numbers. Your recovery rate for critical injuries is abysmal, not because they can't be treated, but because you're not treating them in time. The human has no authority to question our methods, Trax protested to Kalen. Kalen observed the confrontation with calculated interest. The human has demonstrated effectiveness. Her methods will be tested on the next wave of casualties. Results will determine policy. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A massive Terran counteroffensive struck the Kthar forward positions, resulting in hundreds of wounded flooding into the medical facility within hours. Thorne immediately implemented her triage system, assessing injuries based on severity and treatability rather than rank. Officers with minor wounds were made to wait, while critical cases, regardless of status, received immediate attention. Initially, there was resistance. Several high-ranking officers demanded immediate treatment, citing Imperial protocol. Kalen was forced to intervene, using his authority to enforce Thorne's system, at least temporarily, as an experiment. The results became evident within days. The survival rate increased dramatically. Soldiers who would have been left to die under standard Kthar protocols returned to duty. The medical facility operated with unprecedented efficiency as Thorne trained the Kthar medics in her techniques. But something else was happening, something Kalen noticed with growing concern. As Thorne treated the wounded, especially the lower-ranked soldiers, she talked to them, really talked to them, asking about their experiences, their thoughts, their fears. Many Kthar, and used to being addressed as individuals worthy of conversation, initially responded with confusion or suspicion. But gradually, they began to talk back. You're experiencing combat stress. He overheard her telling a group of infantry soldiers as she applied regenerative treatments to their wounds. In humans, we call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not weakness. It's a natural neurological response to extreme situations. Kthar warriors do not experience stress. One soldier insisted, though his posture suggested otherwise. Every sentient being with a complex nervous system experiences stress, Thorne corrected gently. Ignoring it doesn't make you stronger. It makes you vulnerable to psychological breakdown. Simple techniques can help manage it. She proceeded to teach them breathing exercises and mental focusing techniques disguised as combat readiness optimization. The soldiers, intrigued by anything that might improve their battlefield performance, practiced earnestly. Later, Kalen confronted her in her makeshift office. You're doing more than healing physical wounds. Thorne looked up from her medical logs. Of course I am. I'm a doctor, not a mechanic. My patients aren't machines to be patched and sent back into battle. You're introducing dangerous concepts. Combat stress management techniques are reserved for command staff in our military. Because heaven forbid your cannon fodder should learn to think clearly under pressure, she replied sarcastically. Tell me, Commander, why are you so afraid of these soldiers becoming more effective? Not more effective. More. Questioning. Kalen lowered his voice. I've observed changes in the troops you've treated. They speak differently. They question orders they would have previously obeyed without hesitation. They question stupid orders that would get them killed unnecessarily, Thorne corrected. They still follow sound tactical decisions. The difference is they're now thinking soldiers rather than mindless drones. The Kthar military functions on absolute obedience. And how's that working out for you in this war? She challenged. Your casualties are astronomical because your rigid hierarchy prevents adaptation. Your soldiers die unnecessarily because they can't question flawed tactical decisions made by commanders who never set foot on the battlefield. The truth of her words stung more than Kalen wanted to admit. The war with the Terrans had dragged on far longer than Kthar strategic models had predicted, precisely because humans adapted unpredictably, while Cthar forces remained bound by doctrine. "You're practicing psychological warfare," he accused. "I'm practicing medicine," she countered. "Complete medicine, not your compartmentalized version. And it's working. Your wounded return to duty faster, fight more effectively, and survive longer. Isn't that what you want? Not at the cost of our fundamental principles." Thorne's expression softened slightly. Perhaps some principles should be examined when they cause more harm than good. As Kalen departed, he noticed a group of soldiers Thorne had treated earlier. They stood straighter, moved with greater purpose. But the difference was more than physical. There was something in their eyes that troubled him deeply, the beginning of individual thought where once there had been only collective obedience. Dr. Thorne wasn't just healing bodies. She was awakening minds. And for the Cthar Empire, that was far more dangerous than any Terran weapon. Over the following months, reports began filtering back to Cthar High Command of disturbing anomalies in battlefield behavior. Units that had been treated in Thorne's medical facility showed statistically significant deviations from standard Cthar. Military doctrine. In the Callisto engagement, a squad commander had disobeyed a direct order to abandon wounded comrades, instead organizing a successful extraction that saved 12 soldiers who would have been left behind. In the Quantum Ridge skirmish, a junior officer had modified battle plans on the fly, adapting to changing conditions rather than following preset protocols, resulting in an unexpected victory. Most concerning was the Epsilon Valley incident, where Cthar forces had encountered a human civilian settlement in a contested zone. Standard doctrine called for immediate elimination of all potential hostile assets. Instead, the Cthar unit commander had established a perimeter and evacuated the civilians before securing the area, citing unnecessary waste of potential intelligence sources as justification. Kalen knew the truth. All three commanders had been treated by Dr. Thorne. "She's spreading a contagion," Supreme Commander Vorix declared during the Emergency Council meeting, which Kalen had been ordered to attend via secure quantum link. Not a biological one, an ideological one. This human healer has somehow infected our troops with dangerous human concepts. Her methods have increased our combat effectiveness by 31% in sectors where she has operated, Kalen pointed out, feeling compelled to present the complete data. Casualty rates have decreased. Recovery rates have improved. At what cost? Vorix demanded. "We're receiving reports of troops questioning orders, of modifications to standard protocols, of hesitation in executing necessary but difficult commands." Perhaps. Kalen chose his words carefully, aware he was treading dangerous ground. These adaptations represent tactical evolution rather than contamination. The silence that followed was deafening. In Cthar society, suggesting that established doctrine could be fundamentally improved was tantamount to heresy. "Commander Kalen," Vorix said finally, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have spent too much time with this human. Your judgment may be compromised. Your orders are to terminate this experiment immediately. The human healer is to be executed as a psychological warfare operative." Something cold settled in Kalen's chest. "Understood, Supreme Commander. I will carry out your orders." But as the transmission ended, Kalen remained motionless, his mind racing. The logical part of him acknowledged that Vorix was correct. Dr. Thorne represented a fundamental threat to Cthar society. Yet another part, a part he hadn't known existed until recently, rebelled against the idea of executing someone whose only crime was healing too well, caring too much. He found Thorne in what had become her domain, a sprawling field hospital that now treated Cthar and captured human soldiers with equal care. What had begun as her small experiment had grown into something unprecedented, a place where the wounded of both sides received treatment based solely on medical need. More shocking was the atmosphere within the facility. Cthar medics worked alongside captured human medical personnel in a collaboration that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Wounded soldiers from opposing forces occupied adjacent beds without conflict. "I wondered when this would come," Thorne said quietly when she saw Kalen's expression. She dismissed the medical staff with a gentle gesture, creating privacy in her small office. Your high command has finally noticed what's happening. You knew this would be the outcome, Kalen accused. This was your strategy all along. My strategy was to save lives, she corrected. Everything else followed naturally. When you treat people with compassion and dignity, they tend to extend the same to others. It's contagious in the best possible way. You've been ordered terminated as a psychological warfare operative. If she felt fear, she didn't show it. Instead, she simply nodded. And you've come to carry out that order. For the first time in his career, Kalen found himself unable to articulate a clear response. Your methods have proven effective, but dangerous to the status quo, she finished for him. Tell me, Commander, in these months you've observed my work, have you seen me do anything that harmed the wounded? Have I ever given less than my best effort to save every life I could, Cthar or human? No, he admitted. Your dedication to healing is absolute. Then ask yourself this. If my approach to medicine threatens your empire so profoundly, what does that say about the foundations it's built upon? Before Kalen could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. A junior medical officer burst into the office. Commander, Doctor, the forward bases have been overrun. Massive casualties incoming, both our forces and captured humans. Thorne was immediately on her feet. Activate all surgical teams. Convert the auxiliary storage areas to treatment spaces. We'll need all hands. She moved to leave, then paused, looking back at Kalen. Are you going to execute me now, or after I've saved as many of your people as I can? The next 12 hours were chaos as the medical facility was flooded with casualties from a massive and unexpected Terran offensive. Thorne worked tirelessly, moving from one critical patient to the next, performing complex surgeries and directing both Cthar and human medical staff with calm authority. Kalen found himself pressed in his service as well, following Thorne's directions to assist with triage and basic treatment. He watched as she saved soldier after soldier, Cthar officers and infantry, human soldiers, and civilians, with equal determination. As the crisis gradually subsided, leaving the medical staff exhausted but triumphant, Kalen made his decision. He approached Thorne as she finished treating her final patient of the day, a young Cthar soldier who would have been considered expendable under standard protocols. High Command has ordered your execution, he said quietly. I know, she replied, not looking up as she completed the final sutures. Are you going to follow those orders? No. Now, she did look up, surprise evident in her expression. Your continued existence is more valuable than your elimination, he stated, falling back on the logical framework that governed all Cthar decisions. The knowledge and skills you possess represent an asset that would be wasteful to destroy. A small smile touched her lips. That's quite a clinical way of saying you think I should live. It is the only framework I have, he admitted, though I find it increasingly inadequate. What will you tell your superiors? That implementing their order proved impossible due to the current tactical situation. That your medical expertise is critical to maintaining adequate force strength. That eliminating you would result in unacceptable casualty increases. Lies wrapped in truth, she observed. A strategy one have learned from observing humans. He replied with the faintest hint of what might have been humor. The aftermath of Kalen's decision reverberated throughout the Cthar military hierarchy. His formal report, detailing the statistical improvements in combat readiness and the reduced casualty rates resulting from Dr. Thorne's methods, created enough uncertainty at high command to temporarily suspend the execution order. But the true impact was happening on the ground, spreading outward from the medical facility like ripples in a pond. Cthar medical officers who had trained under Thorne began implementing her methods in other field hospitals. Soldiers who had experienced her care carried her ideas with them when they returned to their units. The changes manifested in subtle ways at first. Field commanders began factoring casualty prevention into their tactical planning rather than simply accepting losses as necessary costs. Medical resources were distributed based on need rather than rank. Small adjustments to rigid protocols were made when circumstances warranted flexibility. Then came the incident that could no longer be ignored. During a major engagement in the Proximus sector, a Cathar battalion was ordered to hold a strategically important but ultimately indefensible position. A suicide mission intended to delay the Terran advance while more valuable forces repositioned. The battalion commander, who had spent 3 weeks recovering under Dr. Thorne's care after a previous battle, acknowledged the order and then modified it. Instead of a static defense, he implemented a fluid, adaptive strategy that accomplished the same delaying objective while preserving the majority of his forces. When questioned afterward, he simply stated the objective was achieved more efficiently through preservation of combat assets. He used the language of Cathar military doctrine to justify a fundamentally human approach to warfare, valuing the lives of his soldiers as more than expendable resources. The incident triggered a formal investigation, which quickly expanded as similar cases came to light across multiple fronts, all traced back, directly or indirectly, to exposure to Dr. Thorne and her methods. Supreme Commander Vorix arrived personally at the Forward Command Center, his presence an unmistakable statement of how seriously High Command viewed the situation. Kalen was summoned immediately. Commander Kalen, Vorix began without preamble. You were ordered to terminate the human psychological operative. Not only did you fail to comply, but you have allowed her influence to spread uncontrolled throughout our forces. Supreme Commander, the data supports. The data is irrelevant. Vorix interrupted. This human has introduced corruption into the perfect logical structure of our society. She has made our warriors question the fundamental principles that have guided the Empire for millennia. With respect, Supreme Commander, those questions have led to improved combat outcomes. At the cost of what we are. Vorix's voice was cold with fury. You will bring this human to me immediately. I will execute her myself, and then we will begin the process of identifying and rehabilitating all personnel contaminated by her influence. Kalen knew that rehabilitation meant execution. The potential death toll would be enormous. Thousands of Cathar soldiers whose only crime was learning to think more adaptively, to value life more highly. As you command, Kalen replied formally, but his mind was already racing, calculating possibilities and outcomes. He found Dr. Thorne in her quarters, reviewing medical files. She looked up as he entered, immediately alert to his tension. High Command has arrived, she guessed. Supreme Commander Vorix himself. He intends to execute you personally and then purge all who have been corrupted by your influence. Thorne absorbed this with remarkable calm. That would be a significant percentage of your military forces in this sector. Yes. What do you intend to do, Commander? Kalen hesitated. The path before him was clear, but taking it would mean betraying everything he had been raised to believe. Everything the Cathar Empire stood for. What I must, he said finally. What logic dictates is necessary. He activated his communication device. Security team to Dr. Thorne's quarters. The prisoner is to be escorted to Supreme Commander Vorix immediately. Thorne's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes dimmed. I understand. When the security team arrived, Kalen personally placed restraints on Thorne's wrists. Bring her, he ordered, leading the procession through the corridors of the command center. But they did not go to Vorix's chambers. Instead, Kalen led them to the communications hub, the most secure and isolated section of the facility. Commander, the lead security officer questioned, these are not the Supreme Commander's coordinates. Change of orders, Kalen replied crisply. As the door to the communications hub slid open, he moved with sudden, decisive action. The security team, unprepared for an attack from their own commander, were incapacitated before they could react. Thorne stared at him in shock as he removed her restraints. What are you doing? What your influence has taught me is necessary, he replied, moving quickly to the main communication terminal. We have approximately 7 minutes before security protocols detect unauthorized access. His fingers flew over the controls, bypassing security measures and accessing restricted channels. On dozens of screens, the faces of Cathar commanders appeared, all officers who had directly or indirectly been exposed to Thorne's influence. This is Commander Kalen. he began without preamble. Supreme Commander Vorix has arrived with orders to execute Dr. Thorne and all personnel deemed to be influenced by her methods, which includes most of you. The execution is scheduled to begin within the hour. The reactions range from shock to grim acceptance. These officers understood Cthar protocol. They knew what happened to those who deviated from established doctrine. I am implementing Emergency Protocol Zenith, Kalen continued, invoking an ancient and rarely used Cthar military provision, the right of collective action against leadership deemed to be acting against the Empire's true interests. Commander, one of the officers protested, such action requires overwhelming evidence of command failure. The evidence is in your own records, Kalen replied. Since implementing Dr. Thorne's methods, combat effectiveness has increased by an average of 37% across all affected units. Casualty rates have decreased by 42%. Resource efficiency has improved by 29%. By any logical measure, her influence has strengthened, not weakened, our military capability. What are you proposing? Asked another officer, a battle-hardened fleet commander whose ships had benefited significantly from Thorne's medical innovations. Not revolution, Kalen clarified quickly. Evolution. A formal challenge to current doctrine based on empirical evidence. The Cthar have always prided ourselves on adapting to overcome obstacles. We must now adapt our thinking to overcome our greatest obstacle, ourselves. The debate was brief but intense. These were Cthar officers, trained from birth to follow orders and maintain the hierarchy. But they were also intelligent beings capable of recognizing patterns and evaluating evidence. And the evidence of improvement since Thorne's arrival was irrefutable. One by one, they pledged support to Kalen's initiative. Not rebellion, reorganization. A fundamental reassessment of Cthar military and social doctrine based on demonstrated results rather than traditional assumptions. When a security breach was finally detected and Vorix's forces burst into the communications hub, they found not just Kalen and Thorne, but holographic projections of dozens of Cthar commanders, representing nearly 40% of the Empire's military strength in the sector. What is the meaning of this? Vorix demanded, his rage barely contained. A logical proposition, Kalen replied calmly. The methods introduced by Dr. Thorne have demonstrably improved our military effectiveness. To reject them based solely on tradition rather than results is itself illogical and contrary to the Empire's founding principles of perfect rationality. You dare lecture me on our principles? Vorix was nearly apoplectic. This human has infected you with her weakness. Not weakness. Thorne spoke for the first time, her voice steady. Strength. The strength to question assumptions. The strength to value all life, not just those deemed worthy by arbitrary hierarchies. The strength to adapt rather than rigidly adhere to outdated protocols. Your execution will be particularly satisfying. Vorix snarled, reaching for his sidearm. But the security forces behind him hesitated. Many had themselves been treated in Thorne's medical facility. They had experienced firsthand the difference between her approach and traditional Cthar methods. Supreme Commander, Kalen said quietly, the Empire has always evolved to meet new challenges. That is our greatest strength. Dr. Thorne has shown us a new evolution, one that preserves our logical foundation while integrating concepts we previously rejected without proper evaluation. You are all contaminated, Vorix declared, looking around at his increasingly uncertain security team. All of you will be rehabilitated. Or perhaps, came a new voice as the door to the communications hub opened once more. It is our understanding of contamination that requires rehabilitation.